that are shared or that we read, I know that at its core, what it is saying to us and how true that really is. So I give thanks for Dr. Leo sharing that particular writing for today. I am really heartened by this ability to come and share with you on a regular basis, regardless of some of the barriers that need to be overcome for this type of thing to happen. Remember, I said initially, and as part of the affirmations that we do, that I am not a victim of this world, nor are you. The things that tend to happen, sometimes we like to judge them, recognizing or thinking about the problems that may be inherent in any number of things. But when we recognize that these things show up not to tear us down, but rather sometimes it is the obstacle over which we must overcome that builds the muscles of who we are to be. And so today, when I thought about this idea of when I wanted to come in here and I wanted to share it with you, there were so many things that started to bombard my awareness. And I thought about the things that I had been exposed to, because as you may know, there are no accidents in this universe. Everything that comes to you for a reason. And so I constantly am putting myself in a mode of receptivity where I am listening and watching and recognizing that there is something that I too must do in order for me to have the experience that I want. So if it is to expose myself to different readings or writings or books or things like that, in order for me to have material that flows out from me effortlessly, that may be what I need to do. And so for each and every one of us, we all have something that we do, and we do on a regular basis, because we know that it is by doing those things, and only by doing those things, do we really allow ourselves to expand into who it is that we can possibly be. So to that end, this morning, I started to think about this idea of ourselves as beings. And it seems to me that since time began, there have been wars and rumors of wars. As a matter of fact, when you open up and you start to read the Bible, it is chock full of this idea of conquering new lands, new worlds, of expansion, of kingdoms and fiefdoms coming into being and going out, annihilation of races, of people. And what seems like it can come across as mayhem, maliciousness, acquisitions, all types of things. Cain killed Abel right out the box. And so when you start to think about the things that we've seen and the places, all the places in which friction has occurred, we might think to ourselves for a moment that the real legacy of man has been one of struggle and strife. It has been one of wars and rumors of wars, one of killings and what do I want to say? And tribalism and clanism and different types of things. We can look at that and we can see that, but at the same time, to only see that might be to miss the bigger picture or the bigger stories. You see, so much of the journey that has happened has been this thing of man, really man and woman, getting to know him or herself through the things that they go through. We go through things in order to grow through things. And when we look at it in a sense and not see that there is a necessity for us to cultivate all the various parts that make us who we are, We have to cultivate those. We grow them so that we might grow ourselves. Let me give you a little for instance. It's really interesting because I was sharing or reading out of a book, and it talked about this idea of bringing things into balance for the things that we do in our lives. Can you imagine for a minute that we are these triune beings? We've been told this over and over again, but not necessarily always with the recognition of what that means. So, and many of us think of ourselves as mind, body, and spirit, or mind, body, soul. We've got various names that we use for that, but it is the three parts of our being that usually we think about. Now, for so many, there is a part that only is aware of the body as a way of being in the world. If you could think about it in the physicality of it, it is what shows up on a given plane. When you look out around you, it is the things that show up, the materiality of life, the body, what makes it what it is and gives it place. When you think about a noun, it says it's a person, place, or a thing. A body is a tangible thing that you can see. A thought, however, is something that is not something that you can see, but rather it exists in the mental realm. It has a body to it that you cannot see. An idea exists, but it is only something that is existing in your mind and not something that others can automatically see. They may sense, but cannot see. And so when you think about this mind, or you think about thought, mental, body, mind, soul, or you think about the physical, the mental, or the spiritual, part of which, when you think about it in that context, there are certain things that you will not be able to see. So when it came down to spirit, I thought to myself, how is it that I can distinguish what is spiritual from what is mental? The thoughts, and here's one of the interesting things I remember from my days in philosophy. They talked about volition, or the will. Volition meaning something that I am creating with my mind, and I'm giving it shape with my mind. If I were to say to you to think about your car, and then think about the parts to your car. What needs to happen in order for your car to go from a sitting position to one of driving? You know that for you will unlock your car, get in your car, and when you turn the key, there is something, the starter begins. The starter is what ignites or sends a spark to the battery, which then sends a spark to, or the battery powers the alternator, and then the alternator begins to move. There's all of these mechanisms that begin to move, and it is first it was a thought or an idea in somebody's mind that then became outpictured into an experience of starting or driving in an automobile. So when you think about things, you think about it, and we think about it in stages or in steps. Like, how does an automobile start? What is the spark? What gets this to moving? What then happens when I press on the brakes or put it into gear? It is something that incrementally happens, and you can see how a thought may be shaped or formed, or how you can stay with it or release it. It has a body to it, and hopefully it has a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. But when you think about this idea of your own spiritual nature, that has a different texture to it. It has a different feel to it. It is not something that you are giving shape to and form to, but rather something that is happening through and with you. Oh, I love this. I want to stay with this and kind of make it a little plain, because to me the making these distinctions can be so beautiful, right? So if, say for instance, we are trying to figure out this idea about what's the difference from the between the thinking to think about a thing, or in spiritually intuiting a thing, the spiritual thought, spiritual ideas, intuitiveness don't come from a willing faculty of the mind, but rather sometimes it comes in as a dawning, sometimes it comes as a knowing, sometimes it feels as if it is given as a whisper might be given, or something that not necessarily given to your senses, but something that sort of just arises within you. It's so beautiful when you think about all the ways in which spirit just gives you those moments of aha, or of clarity, of recognition, or whatever it is. A spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience has a different feel to it. It is not something you are trying to make happen, either with your mind or in your thoughts. It is something that just reveals itself to you. Now, over the past week, I have read many things about when things are in balance and when they're out of balance. There was a story about a young mother who was highly educated, who gave birth to 4 children. And at the time, she was very much aware of problems that seemed to go on in the world. And so she wanted to be the person who educated her children, the person who took responsibility for what they were exposed to in the world, the person who kept them safe. And so she worked from home, but she also had her children at home. And in order to cut down on some of the drama and things that she would have to deal with, she decided that she would take her children and strap them into car seats and then teach them all that they needed to know at home with her while she worked, and basically just denied them this ability to interact with each other or to get up and play and jump around and do the things that children do. This efforting to keep them, still, but then to teach them things had its detrimental effects, as you can imagine. The children never learned how to use their motor skills correctly. So that meant that the simplest things, whether it is using scissors or being able to hold a pencil or a crayon correctly, was difficult for them. As a matter of fact, in spite of their age, they did not walk in ways that showed that they had developed their legs and their coordination skills so that they could do the games and the running around that other children did. They were totally weak. And so at the cost is that she had very intelligent children at the cost of having children who were not physically developed. It was an imbalance. And because they were not exposed to other children, they weren't able to develop faculties of intuition or how to be friends, or how to friend, or how to share, or different things like that. It seems as though that there is this wonderful ability that sometimes mothers have to have a sense of needing to do certain things at certain times in order to develop and cultivate the skills that are necessary for our children's development. The same thing is true for us. A lot of times we develop in some areas of our life at the detriment or to the detriment of other areas. And so what happens is that we get totally out of balance. If we are concentrate simply on developing our the thoughts of our minds, and we develop those without also developing this intuitive ability or to recognize compassion or empathy, things like that. If we've only developed the mental knowing, what we end up having is something like the guy on the Big Bang Theory. I forget what his name is, but it becomes out of balance so that we don't recognize that there was something, a necessary part in the interaction that we have with one another that helps to develop who we are or who we are to become through that interaction. And so to look at and to not recognize that there is a physical being that needs to be exercised and worked, there is a spiritual being that needs connection and interaction, as well as a mental being that does need to exercise their mind and their ability to think. All of these things operating together and more make up each and every one of us. But sometimes what we do is we allow ourselves to get out of balance. We get things out of order so that they never have this ability to come together. If you focus only on one thing to the detriment of others, we have problems. So sometimes what we think about, even in our spiritual life or in each of those aspects, we think about things very differently. Sometimes we think about spirit as being only what we do with God. Like only this idea that we have, that we share with God, then we think that that is enough, without recognizing that there is not just the cross that goes up and down, man, and connecting man to the heavens, so to speak, but also the arms that go across, connecting us one to the other. And without the other, can we really have an experience of God? That becomes the challenge for each and every one of us. The challenge becomes, well, now that I find myself in this spiritual realm or doing this spiritual walk, what is it that I am to do? You cannot. We try to have relationships with a spiritual being, and God said, or Jesus said in the book, he says, how can you love a God that is in heaven that you have never seen when you cannot love your brother who you see every day? And so there becomes this thing of trying to figure out, even then, in the context of our relationships, the context of our family, how do we then have the relationships that are necessary to build the spiritual musculature that we say that we desire? It all necessarily works together, and one without the other, it just does not happen in the same type of way. And so there has to be this recognition that our relationship to God is not just about what we do when we are, whether we're praying or whether we are sermonizing or it's not just those. It is that, and it is God, and it is love, and it is family, and it is learning how to forgive, as well as how to rest, right? How to go forward and how to rest. I was having a good conversation with a friend of mine that talked about this idea of efforting. He said to me that men are doers. And he was trying to express to me this thing of, if you are not like actively doing something, making an effort towards something, then you aren't doing what it is that men do. Which I thought was really interesting, because all of us, it's my hope, all of us put forth an effort. But what I also recognize too is that in all of our efforting, there is an ebb and a flow. So if you think about the flow as being the push towards, and the ebb being the relaxing or the releasing, there is a necessary ebb and flow to all of life. And when we get it, when we get out of balance, sometimes we'll think that it's all about the push without recognizing that it's also about the ebbing. Now, the ebbing is important, and I talked about that this past week. This ebbing, this idea of rest, this idea of non-resistance. In the biblically, it says, resist not evil. We talk about a day of rest. We talk about this idea of rest. And in rest, a wonderful thing happens. In rest, we get clarity. In rest, we get to take a breath. In rest, we get to put down our sword. In rest, we get to have those moments where we think about what it is that we're doing. It's the rest that allows the push to occur. And so one without the other does not exist. I mean, when you think about that, rest, you sharpen, you reflect, you get clarity around ideas. I remember hearing a story about a famous, chopping down the tree thing that they did and I forget wherever it was, Wisconsin or something. They had this logging community, and people would, compete every single year by cutting down trees. And, there was a guy who was just, big, strong, and strapping, and he would win all the time. He'd had for the last 12 years, he won all the axe competitions. And here comes this little guy, upstart from out of town, who comes in and wants to compete. He wants to compete up against this guy. And the guy's looking at him like, you gotta be kidding. Like, who is this? Oh, this is gonna be easy, he thought. And so they go out into the woods and they had to chop down, see who can chop down the most trees in a certain amount of time. And what they found is that the big guy who had won, he went with effort, and he was just chopping like he always did. He just chopped down trees, just going like an Energizer bunny, right? That was exactly what he did. But then here comes this upstart, and he chopped down a few trees, and then he stopped and he sharpened his axe. And then he started chopping down another tree and another tree and another tree, and he stopped again and he sharpened his axe. And the people who were on the side were looking at him thinking to himself like, no way, okay, this guy already lost, because here he is turning around sharpening his axe. He's sharpening his axe, and this other guy is hacking. He's hacking. Well, when everything was said and done, they actually tied. They tied for the equal amount of trees, even though this guy stopped to sharpen his axe. And people weren't understanding what it was that this little upstart did that caused him to actually have a tie. And it was that the more this big guy was just chopping, what he didn't recognize is that the nonstop of it at a certain point dulled his axe. And the same effort that he put towards the first tree, he had to put, 4 or 5 times closer to the end. He was putting forth more effort because his axe had become dull. You guys, that's one of the reasons why we meditate. One of the reasons why we stop and pray. One of the reasons why we breathe. Is so that we can actually hear what it is that God might be saying to us or through us. It's those moments where we have the ebb, that we are able to rejuvenate and really hear what it is that God is trying to share with us, trying to impart to us. And if we just keep going, not realizing that there can be some adjustments that are made, some reflections that can be had. If we just keep going, we miss all the beauty that comes out of those moments of rest. As I thought about this, I thought about this type of image it appears in everything that we do. Even when we give birth to a child, there are moments when you hear somebody say, push, and you push, but then you got to rest. Because this idea that you just push without end is not sustainable. You push and then you rest. And you do it when you go to the bathroom. That's the same. We push and then we rest. You push, you press, and then you do it when you're with sex. You do it with breath. You do it with everything you do. There is that ebb and flow. Whether we're talking about the ocean or the moon, there's an ebb and flow to everything. And so when we are able to see that everything in the universe responds to this same kind of balancing act, the same kind of thing, then what we can do is that on a given basis, on any given day, we can still have that experience of the ebb and flow. We come to respect it, that there are times at which we are pushing and times at which we must lay down our arms. You guys, the battles have been raging forever. Like I started out saying that, even when we go all the way back to Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, we've seen battles raging. We've seen things that seem to, that come out of the push, the tension that we put into things. But until we recognize that is not the only way of being, that rest, it seems, doesn't get as much attention as the push does, but it is equally necessary. So I would ask you this new year, what is it that you need to take a rest from? What is it that you need to reflect upon? What is it that you need to sharpen? What is it that you can draw back on so that you can see what it is that needs to unfold in your life, in your experience? Because it's not all the push. Sometimes we think that, even this idea of I hear people often say, pray without ceasing. Okay. But if you do that without ever resting, how do you hear? How do you allow that gentle dawning to happen for you? And and part of it is I tell you, it's something beautiful when we have the anticipation that not only is there a push on my part, a recognition on my part, but there is an allowing that also needs to happen. To keep it in balance, all of those things, it is part of the way that it flows. So when I think about some of the things that we see, it's really interesting. This time of year, there's so many people that are flocking off to the gym, and they go in there and they start off exercising because it's a whole new year, and we've got commitments that we've made and ways and images that we see, and we want to start with this new exercise routine. And there's the push. We're pushing. And it's wonderful to push, but without the recognition that the rest is necessary, what we'll do is we'll burn ourselves out. At a certain point, you might look in the mirror and you might not see the results and give up too soon. There is always an ebb and flow to everything. And when we begin to recognize that ebb and flow, and that that if we are just in the push, we'll push our way out. You guys, there sometimes we have to step back. We've got to take a moment. We've got to take a breath. We've got to allow for the way spirit shows up. I love this idea, because one of the things I make sure I do every single day is I sit in my meditation. I sit down on my cushion and I listen, and I want to hear what it is that God is saying to me and through me. I open myself up to this type of thing so that I'm not always feeling as if, I gotta make something happen, rather than allowing it to be. This year, this new year, I want you to think about this story, whether it's the story of the Acts or the story of what you witnessed, right? Whether we talk about it in terms of the children and their parents, and how they didn't allow them to develop the skills necessary. You guys, one without the other. If we're focusing in on developing only our mental ability without also doing our mental and our spiritual, or our spiritual and our physical, if we're only focused on one piece, one part, we never get to the fullness that we are meant to be in. It is so interesting that sometimes we value one over the other, left brain over right brain, or mental ability over spiritual ability, or vice versa. When we're out of balance, we know it. And it's up to us to begin to seek out those opportunities that allow us to see what it is that we need to do. Whether it is recognizing that part of spiritual development means the friendships and the family and the love that we share. That's part of it. It's not the whole of it, but it's certainly part of it. The feeling of the push, and then the relaxing. It's part of, whether it is on a daily basis, whatever you are doing, it is all a part of that. We've got to recognize that, so that we get to feel how it is that spirit comes in and out of our awareness all the time, every day and in all ways. I am so grateful to be able to witness how it works in my life. And sometimes all you need to do is look out at nature. Sometimes we can look at the basic things that we do. Sometimes it is just reading. Sometimes it is learning. Sometimes it's sharing. Sometimes it's to recognize even the places where we feel the anger and the push or the resistance, to just recognize that balance is what we do. And having the faith that it all works out if we would just give up the struggle, resist not evil, and see what is there for you. You guys, I am so grateful for this venue. I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you, to share with you, to speak with you today. I'm grateful for all of it. I trust that you have heard something today that you can apply to your experience, whatever that may mean. Apply it and see what is there for you to do. Because if we see that all of these things work together for our good, if we recognize that, then what we do is not try to work against the others to exclusion. All of it exists for a reason. And coming into awareness and appreciation of that really does grow us and expands our awareness. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for allowing me to share this. And I trust that wherever it needs to be applied in your life, you will apply it. One of the things that I know is that we often look for stories that to illustrate what it is that we're going through. Well, you guys, your life is the story that illustrates the work that needs to be done. You can look in your own senses and see places where you are either pushing or you're resting. And sometimes we rest too long. We've got to recognize that both and are part of it. Where do you need to push? Where do you need to rest? I thank you. I bow deeply to you. And know that I am sharing on behalf of Agape Renaissance Center. Your support of this ministry is greatly appreciated. I'll have all of that information if you choose to support us in the description or in the overhead once I'm off of here. I will continue to pray for you and yours, and I thank you for being with me, sharing with me. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever you are, God is, and all is well. Amen. Thank you, and have an amazing day.